1 week season.
1 week season, fam, La Familia. Welcome back. 1 week season, FanDuel Labs, week 7. I'm your host, Mike Johnson, M Johnson 86. Great to be here with you. Sorry, I was a little slow on the intro there. You caught a quick glimpse of me before it jumped over from the countdown to our intro. But it's great to be here with you guys. Week 6 was a very good one for yours truly. Not necessarily on FanDuel. I did all right on FanDuel, but yeah, we'll get into my results from Draftkings. We will talk to our good buddy Maximus about his ventures into the once again knocking on the door, and he's going to break it down one of these days. But yeah, very excited. Week 6 was a fun one. Week 7, a little bit ugly on the surface, especially for a site like FanDuel. It's so touchdown heavy. We got a lot of games with game totals around 40 or below. So going to get into the strategy around that. And we are going to bring my good buddy Maximus to the stage. Maximus, welcome. I'm digging the lion in the background. How you doing?
He's been here the whole time. Well, first off, I want to congratulate my esteemed colleague, Mr. Mike Johnson. I believe two big hits. I know this is a FanDuel show, but hats off to you, sir, on the Draftkings hits this past week. Amazing to see that and to hear about it. I believe you had said you've been in a little bit of a cold streak too, so that's just perseverance and persistence. It does pay off, people, and my host is an example of that.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, I'd had a couple big scores in the 2021 season. 2022, I mean, I had a couple. It wasn't like I lost every single week, but I think, from weeks, I look back at my results from weeks like 11 through 18, the main slates, I think there was like 2 weeks that I broke even, and the rest of the weeks I was down, with like 3 or 4 of them being like down like 80%. And then this year, over the first 5 weeks, I had like 1 break even week, and 2 really bad weeks, and 2 like down a little bit weeks. So yeah, it was it felt good. Felt good to get back on the winning train. For those who aren't familiar with what we're talking about, if you follow us on Twitter, if you're in our Discord, you probably would have seen the things in the Bink channel. But I had a couple of good lineups on DraftKings, actually, and I'll share them quick. So on DraftKings, I took second in the 300K. This is the Flea Flicker. That's a $5 tournament, 50,000 to first. My team took second, as you can see here, with 208.28 points, 4 points behind fellow 1 week season member Gronk Destroys. Shout out to Gronk Destroys on a wonderful lineup that he had. Took me down there. If I'm gonna take second, I'm happy, very happy that it was to a fellow 1 week season member. So that was awesome. This lineup I have here, we talked about a lot on the site. Both JM and I had the Falcons block in our player grid. And I talked about the Falcons Commanders game in my player grid that's available for our subscribers. That was my GPP game of the week. The Falcons Commanders game hit really well here with Ritter, London, Jonnu Smith. Then I had a Dolphins Panthers kind of stack there with Mostert and Waddle and Adam Thielen coming back for the Panthers. And then to round it out, I had some high usage, high upside players, I thought, with Kenneth Walker, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and the Bears defense. So yeah, that was a bit of a sweat. Maximus, you've talked about the feeling like you're on the cusp and just haven't had things break right at the end. it's interesting because like you look at this lineup, and granted, so this tournament, it's a $5 entry fee, and there are, let's see, 71,000 entries in it. So that's, it's a lot bigger than like number of entries than what you're playing, but still the concept holds the same. Cause like here I took second. And if you look at only mine, I actually had another lineup took 24th, one took 73rd, one 14th. So had a few up there, but like the interesting thing is like you can see, so 10th place had 205.48. So, they're within 3 points of me. It comes down to the end there, and I think there, that's a 3-point difference between 10th place in this tournament. The swings are just so big. 10th place here is $1,000. So like, look at that guy's roster. And if you're watching this PNH 324, apologies, but he had a very good roster too. It's 3-point difference. You think about the course of a day in NFL DFS, like how small that margin is. It's great. I took second, 20 grand. That's awesome. Was my lineup $19,000 better than his? Probably not. I had Amon-Ra St. Brown. He actually did too, that guy brought up. But there's so Amon-Ra St. Brown, the Lions, obviously they lost David Montgomery. And St. Brown was sitting on 8 for 100 and a touchdown, at that point in the game, and they're kind of trying to ice the clock. On their last drive, he caught 4 passes for 24 yards because the Bucs were stacking the box, so they were just were throwing short passes to St. Brown, and that's 6.4 points right there. And there's some people who had him as well below me. But, if they just run the ball or if they throw it to Laporta or something, that there's a big swing there. So, there's skill in it for sure, but there's also, you need some run good. So, to those people who, to what we talked about last week, just it's about the process and just putting yourself in position. And then, hopefully things break right for you. Occasionally, which, during my cold streak, I had some times where those things were breaking the other way. So, just a reality check. That, I'm excited that was a great win, but also got to be aware of it. That even when you have your good ones, you need to be aware of, the variance that went your way. And vice versa when things don't go your way, you got to stay even keel both ways.
Man, payouts are so much better on DraftKings than FanDuel.
What do you mean?
It seems to be like the top 1% based on there's more contests and tournaments and options on DraftKings than there is on FanDuel overall.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, my style just seems to fit historically FanDuel more. I've had more success on FanDuel than actually I've barely played DraftKings at all this year, but there is actually a 5-entry max that's $33 a team that I was playing last year, and I want to start getting into that one on DraftKings. It's similar to the one we cover every week on FanDuel.
Is that the $33 one?
Yeah. 33 teams, 5-entry max. That's going to be my target on DraftKings, I think, to try to add to the existing focus, which I'm at nauseam focused on this one tournament. But yeah, man, awesome team, great correlation there. Definitely your ownership percentages. You can see how you would separate yourself from the field if things broke right. Yeah, I hate the variance train, man. That's what I've been waiting to toot on for you, as far as on that kind of level. But
yeah.
I had too. I had 3 of my 5 teams placed. My best team was 8th place, so I cracked the top 10 for a second time in 6 weeks. I had another week where I had a 15th place. So I've had a 7th and 8th and a 15th 3 out of 6 weeks in the tournament that we cover. And then My third team that creeped into money placement was because of Amon-Ra. I actually did a radical late swap from a stack that I initially had set up. But then when I saw the ownership was so low on Goff and Amon-Ra, I went ahead and switched it to them. And I think there was one other player too I switched out. And that actually crept me into the my third of 5 teams making the money line in the tournament this past Sunday. So another ode to thinking about late swap and thinking about your options and having kind of being cognizant of the salary too, or what you have to spend to potentially be able to switch around in the late window. And so yeah, I had a good week as well. But again, hats off, great week for Mr. Johnson, and I'm ready to roll with as ugly as this week definitely looks on the face of it. I've been doing the start of my usual digging process, and I think I've found some potential gold. I say that knocking on wood very cautiously, but
yeah, I do want to touch on. It's funny because like you brought up the ownership percentages on this lineup. I barely, if at all, think about ownership when I'm building rosters. Like I'm just trying to build good rosters. Especially at the running back position. We were talking in our group chat with like Xandamir Hilo JM last week about just like how like running back chalk is like good chalk for a reason. Usually, they're in the best spots. They touch the ball often enough that it usually works itself out, at least to a certain degree. But in general, I'm not building thinking, oh, this guy's low owned, I got to get him. This guy, like, I'm just playing. Like I did my research. I actually did the game write up for the Falcons game, and I really liked the Falcons stack. And I do all my stuff. I turn my player grid in and everything kind of before I like consume anything else from like JM or any of the other guys. And so when I went through JM's player grid, I texted him right away. I'm like, hey, I'm excited to see we're both on the Falcons. And I really didn't I didn't even think about it from the aspect of like, these guys are all going to be single digit ownership. I was just like, I think they're going to throw a lot and they're cheap. Like they're going to score well. Same with, the Dolphins Panthers game. There's a lot of discourse on Twitter about like how crazy owned Mostert was and this, that, and the other. And, I saw people like, oh, well, if you played 45%, 50% owned Raheem Mostert, like whatever, like I'm fine with losing to that. But I would say like I've probably now had like 12 to 15. I don't know the exact number dating back to 2013 or 14, whatever. Like kind of pretty big weeks like this. And I would say half of them have had a running back that's like over 35% owned on the roster. So it's like, it's about the roster, I guess, is where I'm going with it. Like, yeah, you're not going to have all the chalkiest dudes, but like that shouldn't be like forefront of your mind, and you shouldn't avoid a player because of ownership. The reality is like, Mostert is like, he's the best running back, non-CMC running back in football this year. Coming into that game as the clear feature back against the worst run defense on a week where not many teams were expected to score a lot of points. Like at 6,400, like you could argue 47% is like way under-owned. So just, I just wanted to touch on that because that's the biggest mistake, I think, since I've gotten into content 3 years ago. And being on the site and kind of hearing more of what people are saying and like people in Discord, like the focus is for most people is way too centered on ownership instead of centered on the plays. And then kind of the ownership is like a cherry on top. So if that makes sense, like it was interesting. Like when I was looking through the lineup, I'm like, oh yeah, all these guys are pretty low owned. I was surprised at a few of them that they were so low owned. But so yeah, sorry for diving in to a long diatribe there, but and I did mention I also took second in the single entry, the fair catch. It's a $12 tournament on DraftKings for $10K. Very similar lineup: Ritter, Drake London, Pitts instead of Jonnu, and then the Curtis Samuel bringback, and then Mostert and St. Brown again. And I had Kupp and Swift to round that one out. So very similar lineup. It finished 3 points behind the one in the flea flicker. The one in the flea flicker was built on the Bink machine, but you could see there it was the 138th roster. You see the little. I got to share this one instead. 138th roster built. So. Yeah, the $12, the single entry, that was hand built, very similar. The Bink machine, that's what I love about the Bink machine is I feel like I haven't used optimizers for like 3 years because I just got frustrated with them and I couldn't get them to like make lineups that I liked or that I would sign it up. It would make them all and then I'd go and change a bunch of them. But apparently, even the Bink machine, as good as it is, it took 138 tries to beat me. So I digress. We will get into week 7, FanDuel Maximus, your time to shine. Quick shout out. Your tournament, it's growing.
Growing, yeah. I noticed
it's growing. That. It's getting bigger. Are you like a proud father?
Yeah, they added up 77 more spots. First place is 1,000 more. So, quick thing on the percentage thing. The only definitely for this size tournament, it doesn't matter as much. The only thing it does matter to me is if I'm with the late swap feature. If I'm ahead or behind, it's good to have maybe at least a broad sense of what I need to do. Whether I want to stay even with the field if I'm ahead or if I'm grossly behind, pivot to the not as owned, especially on a stack. I completely agree. Running back, especially this year, eating running back chalk is healthy for you. Mm-hmm. But especially like the quarterback stack, if you can switch it out to something else viable that's not as owned or not as perceived to be as owned, then that could help you catch up if that plays out. So that's my only thought on with the ownership on really more on late swap purposes based on if you're ahead or behind. And our Stat ATL does a great section in our scroll every week of a late swap where he actually covers every price range. He does it for DraftKings, but I still read it of who you could pivot to potentially based on if you're ahead or behind. So shout out to a Stat ATL for that column in our 1 week season scroll. But go ahead.
Yeah, he's really good. And I will say that I go through, and we've talked about late swap before. Like I do go through, I start checking on my lineups. I like early fourth quarter. Like I'm Central Time, so for me it's like 2:15 about that. I start like scrolling through my lineups, seeing which ones are like doing well, and then like I'm comparing not just which ones are doing well, but how they're doing and how many minutes left, like for instance, my lineup that was doing the best in the morning, it ended with 190.18 points. So it was actually in like 5th place after the early games, but it had no late guys. So this lineup, the one that took second, Amon-Ra St. Brown, I had him left. So it had 175 points with him still to go. So like I could see that. And to your point, like that's the one place where I did think about ownership. Like I wasn't thinking about it at all when I built the lineup really. But then when I'm in position there, no, I didn't touch it because I'm like, well, this is absolutely perfect. Like I'm in, 30th place and and you can click the people above you and like it looks like nobody above me has Amon-Ra St. Brown or it is going to have a receiver with that much salary. I obviously can't see there. So I'm like, well, this is perfect. And, he's expected to come in like sub 5%. And, if he does, I mean, I can separate even more. So wouldn't touch him there. On the flip side, if it looked like there were people ahead of me that had a similar, if I had a chalkier guy in there, it's just you're going through that thought process. But yeah, I would say that's kind of the spot where I do think of ownership, because then you have more information. I'm trying to put myself in position. And then once I'm in position, evaluating how the slate is gone and what I have left and kind of what's around me. There, I didn't touch it, but yeah, that's a really good point that you made there. Do you want to talk? Did you talk about? Because you said you made some money off of the late swap.
Yeah, like I said, I have 3 teams that place out of my 5, but the third one that placed barely crept above the money line of the points that you needed to kind of be in the top 131 spots. And that was based on swapping out. I think I had like Hurts, Swift, and Goddard. It was something like that. And I switched it out to Goff, Amon-Ra. I can't remember who the other player was. May have been Godwin, like a bring back. And I switched that out because I knew I was way behind on that team, and I was going to have to play something that was perceived to be less owned. And to your point, guys, you can look, you can't know what other teams around you have per se, but you can see the salary that's left over, and then you can kind of educated guess on who they probably have. And yeah, Amon-Ra seemed to come in really low owned. If you looked at at least the FanDuel main slate ownership on our 1 week season site, he was like sub 5. Jared Goff is like less than 1% owned on the main slate, apparently. So I was like, well, Lions are a powerful team at this point. They've been doing good on the road, and the Bucs typically, and obviously Montgomery going out kind of helped the situation, that you can't prepare for that. But in this case, that variance worked out in our favors if you had Amon-Ra. And so, yeah, one of my 3 teams was definitely because of recognizing, okay, you're behind. You're going to have to get a little different here to catch up. You can't just ride like Cooper Kupp and the chalk guys, or you're just going to kind of stay where you're at. But yeah.
Right. All right, let's hear it. Let's hear this lineup for this week.
Speaking of Cooper Kupp, there he is.
Good segue.
Mr. Automatic. So, yeah, seemingly a pretty ugly week. If you're going by Vegas point spreads and individual team totals, on the face of it, doesn't seem like a lot of greatness. But a couple notes I'll correlate with why I have this team to this point. I did kind of want Mike to chime in on 2 spots. The spot that currently is occupied by Josh Jacobs and the flex spot that's occupied by Drake London, because once again, I usually bring this up a little bit every week at the price points and the other players that are around those price points. If you're doing 5 teams, especially, or even more in a bigger tournament, man, there really is some goodness, at least on FanDuel, based on the other players that are available around these prices for this particular week. But we're starting with Matthew Stafford. Per Mike's FanDuel course, if you're going to play not a dual threat rushing quarterback, which certainly Stafford is not, it's probably smart to double stack. And the Rams have gotten pretty concentrated since Kupp has been back. So I have Stafford stacked with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. If you wanted to get, you could always replace Nacua for Tutu in the hopes that he kind of gets back involved more. And then that would really free up salary on some other areas. But in this team, we're going to keep it Kupp and Nacua. It seems like Stafford that's his only 2 targets recently since Kupp's been back. I do not have a run back on this one. However, Drake London could easily be swapped out to George Pickens. And then, you still could keep the base of your team relatively similar. But anyway, for now, we have just London in there at the flex. So I have Stafford with Kupp and Nacua. We have another skinny stack here of Jahmyr Gibbs. Obviously, watch the injury status. But boy, talk about a bad luck streak. Now Craig Reynolds is injured, apparently.
Craig Reynolds is?
He is. Yeah, hamstring. Could look him up real quick.
When did that happen?
Dan Campbell saying that Gibbs is definitely trending towards playing. Craig Reynolds popped up.
Yeah.
He was held out of Wednesday's walkthrough.
Mm-hmm.
We know Montgomery's not playing. I will say this, which I was a little bit surprised, basically because of the history maybe, but Ravens are allowing 19 FanDuel fantasy points a game to running backs through 6 weeks. So if Gibbs continues to trend and he's going to be the lead dog, I love that skinny stack with Mark Andrews at tight end. He's almost $2,000 cheaper than Kelsey, like $1,700, I think. And as good as the Lions have been, they are allowing the most catches and the second most yards to tight ends on the year. And Andrews, one thing I was talking off air with Mike about, it was kind of odd to see that the Ravens have only played at home one time this year. They've been on the road like basically the whole season. I think September 24th was their only home game. So I would imagine there's going to be some energy with the crowd and with them being able to be back home. I feel I like Lamar Jackson as well this week. I think the Lions maybe can bring him out of his shell to be a competitive game where he has to be kind of on his A game, so to speak. But I digress on that. But yeah, so I have a Andrews and Gibbs skinny stack. Josh Jacobs, just a volume monster. Jimmy G may not play. You can run on Chicago. It's pretty self-explanatory there. Jackson Smith-Njigba. So Metcalf is injured. Lockett is injured. So at the very least, both Lockett with a hamstring and Metcalf has a hip and rib that he's been playing through pain. Now, I know people definitely bought into what Metcalf had to say about Njigba. I think a week or two ago, he had some pretty high praise for him. Mm-hmm. This could be the week where those words actually go into action. So at 4,900, he's probably going to be at the least, he could be wide receiver 2 between Lockett and Metcalf battling injuries. I think he's probably comfortable enough in the offense at home against Arizona where they can probably scheme some more targets for him in theory. And so we have him at 4,900. And then we have currently Drake London in the flex spot. And then the Giants defense. So the Giants defense came to life last week, seemingly against the Bills, played a really good game. But beyond that, they're playing the Commanders, who definitely not doubting they'll put up points on the Giants. However, Sam Howell is the most sacked quarterback in the NFL through 6 weeks. So definitely think there is probability for turnovers, strip sacks, interceptions. Again, when you're thinking about defense, it's more about the turnover possibilities rather than the points that they're going to necessarily give up. So that's a little explanation of the team. But like I said, in particular, that Jacobs and London spot, there is so much goodness at those price points that if you're doing 5 teams, now this team's already pretty correlated, but if you really wanted to get crazy on the correlation, like I said, you could swap London out for either George Pickens to complete the Stafford stack. You could also do Marquise Brown as a skinny stack with Njigba. And then that would free you up to get up to, I think with the Marquise Brown and London for Marquise Brown, and then keep Njigba in. And then that would actually get you up, I believe, to Saquon Barkley, which actually oddly would correlate with the Giants defense. So these are all like
you'd be 100 short.
Okay, who was it then that I had? Oh, you know what? Maybe it was Christian Watson in the flex. I thought about at 6,100. You could do Watson, and then you could get up to Barkley. And Watson, I feel, is a viable option this week against Denver. Could be a sneaky bad team shootout. Actually, the point spread on it is one of the higher point spreads on the slate.
The total, you mean? The
game total. Yeah. It's a game that's not being as talked about as like the Chiefs and the Chargers. You know, I read your write-up, Mike, on that. I'm kind of in agreement without reading your write-up. I kind of felt when kind of examining that game that I don't know if Vegas has that right. That game.
What's that?
The way those teams are playing, it could easily be a similar result as the Monday night game.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but that's where like it's not that with the point spreads with Vegas, like they're reacting to what people are expecting. They're like in fairness, like I think it opened at like 51 or 52 and now it's down to like 48. So I mean it's moving down. I think a lot of people, the sharp people that are making these huge bets that are moving these lines, kind of seeing the same thing, that Chiefs defense is good. Neither offense is, they both have high profile quarterbacks and are viewed as these high scoring teams, but they're not like explosive teams. The Chiefs are not making the explosive plays that they've made in years past. The Chargers, without Mike Williams, rookie Quentin Johnston has been underwhelming to say the least. And then, their three best skill players are Eckler, Keenan Allen, and Josh Palmer. I mean, they're all like possession short to intermediate is like their bread and butter. So, it's going to be they're going to have to like matriculate the ball down the field. That's going to take some time. Chiefs defense has been good. It's probably going to be, tough for them to get into the end zone once they are in the red zone. And then the Chiefs just they're just so focused on the running backs and tight ends that they just haven't made a ton of explosive plays themselves. And they're fine. They're at the point they're not trying to prove anything like as far as offensively. They're just trying to win games and win a championship. So, it's an interesting week for sure, because that's like the one high profile, high game total, and it's got a lot of paths to downside. So it's just, it's really interesting. I wanted to bring up with this lineup, you've got the London and Smith Najigba that you originally had. Make sure you get London in the receiver spot in JSN. And to what we were talking about before with the late swap stuff, because they are, like I said, I don't think that much about ownership, but like just looking at early ownership, I do think like the Rams receivers, Jacobs, Gibbs, like those guys will all be fairly popular, just because like they're good plays, which, we don't want to just avoid good plays because they're popular. But based on how the early games go, this gives you opportunity to swap. You've got a lot of salary and you've got 4 spots there with Stafford, Kupp, Nakua, and JSN, to where, depending on how those early games went, who was that, Gibbs?
That was good.
You can basically remove those 4 guys and say, okay, I got, 28-6 to build a roster, a stack with any of the, there's 4 late games. So, you've got Seattle, you've got the likely popular Chiefs Chargers game, Green Bay Denver you brought up. That might be like a perfect spot to attack. But I think, I like how you built this roster, and, to kind of tie together what we talked about earlier. You'd have options there. If your core does really well, you don't need to change anything. Stick with your gut, stick with the plays you liked the best before the slate started. And if it doesn't, maybe then, you find a way to play, a lower owned stack. Austin Eckler's 9,400. Maybe he's lower owned this week just because he's so expensive. But you could get him into that stack, or into that, those spots and play off of it. The Packers stack will be cheap. So there's just options there. Like, I love that it gives you options. And kind of to what we were talking about before, the ownership, the strategy aspect of it, bringing that in late as a way to either get yourself to the top or get yourself in the money like you did last week. And that matters. Like that's, I mean, what is it like what's the min cap?
If you just make the money line, it's $150. So
yeah. So, I mean, that's a big deal. That's 2.5 entries.
Yeah. Cause I finished 8th place for 300. And then I had 2 other teams at 150 each. So you doubled what your overall buy-in is for this tournament.
Looks like with the new structure, they changed it a bit. The main house is 125, but still 2x. You know, that adds up. If you're able to save one team that would have not cashed, then you're able to save a min cash in a tournament like this once, even every 3 weeks. I mean, you know, that's basically one free entry a week almost. So, yeah, definitely important thing to be paying attention to.
And another stack you could switch to. Now, you mentioned him in your FanDuel Focus last week, but I believe he still applies for this week, and that's Geno Smith. Geno Smith is really good price on him, and then you could pair him with Najigba and Lockett, and then have a lot of salary left over for one other spot. I mean, if you wanted to pivot off of Stafford, that would be one route you could go. On that initial Stafford build, you mentioned Eckler. If you took out Nakua and put in Tutu, you could get up to Eckler actually with I believe Watson in the flex. So, you know, there are a lot of pathways even to get that far up. I have the running back cutoff on FanDuel this week at 6,400, which is AJ Dillon. Anything above him with that 7-player shell that we initially had there, you can get up to and be viable and not really be losing much of anything on a certain spot. Part of that is because Najigba at 4,900, I think he opens up a lot if he winds up being a wide receiver 1 or 2 because of the injuries to Metcalf or Lockett. But
yeah, that's the thing about FanDuel too, is like you don't need, like on DraftKings, a lot of times you got to find like multiple or several like cheap guys who are going to see good volume that, you know, they'll rack up like points just to have like a chance. FanDuel really, like, I mean, here you've got a cheap defense in a good spot. And then like if JSN at 5K, like if he has 6 for 80 and a touchdown, like with what you have on the rest of your roster, like you can have really good players the rest of your roster. So, you know, you just kind of have to pick, you just have to find like maybe one spot, maybe 2 if you want to spend up at defense. You know, and the rest of your roster can be guys that you're really high on. You know, and we talk all the time about FanDuel, how important touchdowns are, you know, and, you know, almost to an even greater extent this week, that's going to be the separator. If these game totals prove to be predictive, you know, touchdowns are going to be at a premium. So, you know, if you can find the guys, if you can, you know, it might be a thing where if you can find 1 or 2 cheap guys that get in the end zone, like, you know, even 50 yards and a touchdown, that could be really valuable, you know, and have the added benefit of you can spend up on these premium guys who have, you know, that's the thing kind of that separates the premium guys, is that they have the best chance of scoring 2 touchdowns in a given week. So, you know, it kind of works together there. And sometimes the middle tier guys, they can get volume or have like a big play, but it's hard to get like a bunch of them scoring more touchdowns on a week where there's not that many touchdowns to be had. So, you know, just an interesting week. I mean, it's ugly, but it's fun, you know?
Right. And yeah, a player like Najigba, or finding one player like that to unlock other pathways, because I feel you always have to account for, and especially if you're doing 5 lineups, you can actually account for those premium players and maybe even get it down. You don't have to, but where you could at least have the option to have one of them on each team. Like you could have Eckler on one, or Devontae, or you know, Kupp obviously is a mainstay. He's just, you know, game script independent. So it's good to when you can have one, like you said, one or two players that are mispriced for their role, and that opens up, especially on FanDuel where pricing is looser anyway. It opens up a lot to especially if you're making multiple teams. So
yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, excited for the week. Excited to go build. I got to finish writing my edge games for the week. Again, anyone watching this, of course, we're recording this on Thursday. So any of our injury stuff or things that we don't talk about, keep in mind what information we have at hand here. Of course, this goes live on Friday. We're recording Thursday. But always good chatting with you, Maximus. The more consistent of the two of us you are. I'll
gladly switch you.
I guess I'm the higher upside flyer, and you're the consistent high floor guy.
You're Christian Watson going down the field, although he missed a big
time. Hopefully he doesn't get horse collar tackled this week.
Right. That's
5-yard line. But yeah, no, exciting week. Around the household. Didn't have to sell the artwork. We were able to keep that around for another week. We were able to get groceries without selling it. So good stuff. Best of luck, 1 week season fam. Be sure to like and subscribe. Check out the site. We have 1 week season free. You can get all the NFL Edge games for free. We have weekly passes. You can check out our player grids and all our other content talking about strategy for the week. We have weekly, monthly, and season-long. The season-long price for the Bink machine, which I used in my flea flicker lineup, which works on FanDuel and DraftKings. Also used it on FanDuel for the first time last week. Had some success there, kind of like a break-even week on FanDuel for me. It's made my life easier, just kind of working through it. So highly recommend the Bink machine. You guys should absolutely check it out. We will see you next week. We will see you at the top of the leaderboards. Bye-bye.
1 week season.